to those who are joining us today. Surveys are corroborating what many on this call know from their own experience and their work with community members, that COVID-19 is taking a toll not only on health, but is causing serious hardship. Since March 2020, Propel has surveyed its FreshEBT app users, all SNAP customers, monthly to gain insights into their experience during COVID-19. We're pleased to have Stacy Taylor, who's Propel's head of partnerships and policy, and Julieta Cuellar, Propel's policy research and communications manager here, to share the top line findings from the most recent survey, that from March 2021. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions or comments. And with that, Julieta, I'm going to turn to you to present these findings. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for the introduction. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Propel builds modern, respectful, and effective technology that's directed at Americans with limited income and focus on improving their financial health. As Ellen mentioned, we have created the FreshEBT app, which allows people who receive SNAP to view their food stamp balance at any time via the app, as well as a transaction history. We have over 4 million users now, and they differ a little bit, from the typical, the average SNAP recipient. Our users are overwhelmingly women, a little bit on the younger side. The majority tend to live in urban areas, but it's only about 60%. And they also tend to be mothers, to have at least one child. And so next slide, please. Since March 2020, we've been distributing a survey, a FreshEBT household survey, to learn about the experience and challenges that our over 4 million users are experiencing. So this survey has changed a bit since we first started releasing it a year ago now, but it's been going on for a year in some form. It takes about 10 minutes. It's this month, or last month rather, in March, it was a random sample of over 5,000 of our users, and it's open for about 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of each month. And as I mentioned, all the respondents are EBT card holders. Next slide, please. So the top line of what we've learned in March is that it's a bit of a mixed bag. Food insecurity measures, which have been the same question we've asked our survey respondents for every month for the past year, has reached an all-time low. However, housing instability has continued to increase, and it has reached a new peak, which is quite troubling. In addition, we have some new information this month related to utility shutoffs, which anecdotally from the open-ended questions that we ask every month, we sensed was a real issue for our users. And now we have some data on that. And in addition, we've asked also for the first time, how many of our users have lost SNAP benefits only to begin receiving them again in the past 6 months. And it affects quite a few of our users, over 1/5. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little more depth. And then at the end, I'm also going to share a little bit from our pandemic year in review, which we released recently, and really seeks to sort of give a fuller picture of what we've learned over the last year now. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, food insecurity measures have reached an all-time low since the pandemic started, and we started asking these questions. So we asked in the last 30 days, which of these have you experienced? 31% of respondents report skipping meals, 39% say they've eaten less in the last month, 28% have visited a food pantry, 21% respondents have relied on family or friends for meals. And as you can see, these are pretty big drops from December, which was the previous peak that we had seen. That would have been December 2020. In addition, we also ask every month, do you have everything you need in your house right now? You know, including food, but also household items. And those saying that they do have everything they need at the moment has reached its highest point as well at 12%. As you can see, these numbers are still high. 12% of people say they have everything they need right now. That's still not a very high number. So important to keep that in perspective. We also have asked each month for quite a while, you know, saying your state has funds to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. If you could pick one thing, what would you want help with? And we're seeing now that, I mean, overall, I think help with rent and utilities has always been the highest choice. But recently, we've seen that we've seen increases in people seeking help with debt, healthcare and medical bills, and a decrease in people seeking help with food, which you know, supports the previous points I just made, and I think is you know, suggests that the increased aid we're seeing in terms of nutritional assistance at the federal level is having a positive impact on families. Next slide, please. So as I said, to keep it in perspective, many families are still struggling to eat each month. Here are some people's experiences, our users' experiences in their own words. I'll let you read those. And this is a food insecurity that has been consistent for a year, which is also an important thing to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, while we're seeing some improvement in food insecurity, housing insecurity has worsened. It's moving in the opposite direction, and it has, these measures are reaching their highest point since we started recording them. So we ask every month, do you live in stable housing? And now the number of people, the portion of people living in unstable housing is over 9%. So when things were previously quite bad, overall in December 2020, as you can see, the number was lower. Those saying that they're evicted has also reached its highest point in our survey at 4.69%. And those reporting sleeping in a shelter at least one night in the past month is also up to its highest point. However, we also have the highest portion of people saying they're able to pay April rent on time at 42%. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think it's that aid reaching people, but at the same time, you know, it's been a year of substantial hardship that we're seeing the effects of, right? I think this quote is a great illustration of how much debt people are potentially in their housing situations, which is feeding into this overall housing precarity. Next slide, please. And as I said, we asked about utility shutoffs for the first time, although we have been asking consistently whether or not people are planning to pay their utility bills this month. So we know now that over 10% of FreshEBT users have had their utility shut off in the past 30 days. And that there is there's also a racial inequity in that. As you can see here, almost double the number of Black respondents are reporting utility shutoffs. Latinx respondents also experience this at higher rates. In addition, households with children are also more likely to have had their utilities shut off in the past month. And in March, over 21% of people said that they were not planning on paying their utility bills. And here you can see one user talking about how much debt they're in with their bills, and this comes across every month in the open-ended questions that we ask people. it's a huge source of stress and financial strain. Next slide, please. If you move to the next slide for me, thank you. Nomi, could we move to the next slide, please?
Oh, is there a Wi-Fi delay possibly? I'm looking at what would $300 a month per child. Is that the...
So I do think we probably have a pause given a Wi-Fi connection, but I think Julieta's coming back on. If she's having problems, Stacy, might you be in a position to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to go back a slide to the one before this that's about the churn?
Okay.
So Nomi, if you could back up a slide, I think that would be helpful. I have a feeling this will be of great interest, not welcome news, but great interest to people who do a lot of work on SNAP and SNAP access.
Apologies, my Wi-Fi cut out for a moment. I think we're back on track.
Got it.
Okay, thank you all for bearing with us. So we started asking households about if they had turned from the program over the last few months to better understand households' experience, not only starting to receive SNAP, but also maintaining those access to those benefits, in particular in the face of the pandemic. And we saw that about a fifth of respondents churned off and back onto the program in the last 6 months. And we also see racial disparities in who is most likely to have churned off of the program sometime in the last 6 months. We also have been asking households about their experience being asked to pay back some of their SNAP benefits. And we see, in addition to 2.5% of FreshEBT users reporting that they had to pay back some of their benefits, that many households fear they might have to pay back many of their benefits. So with the number of new additions to SNAP that households are receiving, from PEBT to the 15% to max allotment to the new additional emergency allotment that's going to be going out to households soon. As these benefits come through to households on their EBT card, it's not always indicated on the card or in their transaction why that additional benefit is there. So we very frequently get questions from households about, can I spend this? Should I spend this? Might I be asked to pay that back? So I think that 2.5% is very interesting, but also indicative of sort of a even broader feeling of fear or insecurity or anxiety around managing benefits. And Julieta, it looks like you are back on, so I will pass it back to you.
Yes.
To move on to the next slide.
Thank you so much for taking over. My internet seemed to have gone out. But can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So last month in March, we also asked a question regarding the child tax credit expansion. Simply asking people, imagine you got $300 a month per child in your household until they turned 18. What would that mean to you? How would that change your financial situation? And we got quite an outpouring of responses that ranged from, big aspirations like buying a house or being able to move to a new area, or maybe sort of smaller aspirations, but some that were still quite important, such as, I would be able to put my kids in extracurricular activities, be able to allow them to play sports, I would finally be able to pay my bills. I wouldn't worry about food anymore. I know we could always eat. So here are just some of the responses that we got. I look forward to being able to share even more with you next month. Sort of limited myself here to just one slide so that I could also get into some of the pandemic year in review, but I'll let you read these first. And something that's very interesting here is that even in this question, a lot of people mentioned utility bills, being able to keep the lights on if they got this money. So it's a powerful stressor in households' lives. Next slide, please. So as I said, I'm going to get a little bit into what we share in the pandemic year in review. I'm actually going to put the link to the page where you can read the entire piece. I put it in the chat now. I hope everyone can see that link. I would really encourage you to read it. Next slide. So we tried to sort of capture some of the big themes that we saw across the year. And especially trying to, as we always do in these webinars, and I think we do in general, highlight our users' experiences in their own words. But you know, here's, for example, those same measures that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. You know, here's the average of those across the last across the pandemic year. You know, 44% of users are about report skipping meals, you know, each month. Sorry, eating less each month. About 34% report skipping meals each month. 31% say they visit a food pantry. 25% rely on family or friends for meals. And at a pretty steady rate still, even as food insecurity measures have improved quite recently. 16% of respondents about say every month that they go without prescription medication. Next slide. You know, another theme that we see, next slide, please, is that families with children consistently struggle at higher rates and in different ways than others. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Julieta, we can see you, but I think we may have just lost you again.
I'm sorry, what about now?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Can you move to the
Julieta, I'm
next
going to turn
slide
off
for
your
me,
video
please?
so that I can hear you better. It'll help with the Wi-Fi.
Okay. 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 So if we can move to the next slide. Okay, if it's changed, I can't see it, but I'll keep going then. So, you know, as I was saying, another thing that has been consistent is that families with children have really been caught in such a difficult situation. I think, as we know anecdotally, right? Not being able to rely on in-person schooling or daycare often led people to have to choose between work and caring for their kids. You know, if people were able to hold on to their jobs and hours at all, which we know many could not. So, you know, families with children under 18, we know, were more likely to skip paying a bill in the past 30 days, quite a bit higher than, you know, compared to the rest of survey respondents. They borrowed at higher rates from family, friends, credit cards, et cetera, just to cover their expenses each month. They were more likely to have less than $3 3 days worth of cash on hand. They were more likely to be running low or completely out of food and everyday items when we surveyed them. and they were more likely to be spending quite a bit more just cash out of pocket beyond their benefits on food each month. And the last thing I'll share, next slide, please, is that we know that expanded benefits made a difference. They were sort of coming and going, but we asked pretty consistently, you know, have you received FreshEBT? Have you received extra SNAP? And when we compared the numbers, you know, we saw a difference in these food insecurity measures with those who were getting some extra help and those who weren't. And we were hearing that really in people's own words as well. Like, I was getting $16 a month before on SNAP, but like, I don't know how anyone could eat on that in a month. And I'm finally able to feed myself or feed my family with what I'm getting now. So I'll leave it at that for now. If you can move to the next slide. There's the link again to the page where we both share the monthly insights. So you can see insights from September 2020 through February. March should be going up soon, what I presented today. But you can also read the entire year in review. We also cover things like you know, the experience of benefits starting and stopping, like expanded benefits and the effect that had on people, the accumulation of debt as a theme, housing insecurity sort of as a constant, and also how people helped one another despite all the hardship through the last year. So thank you very much. And I think we'll take questions now.
So, Julieta, thank you so much to you and Stacy. You know, you've gotten late in the slides to look at this last year, and it seems pretty striking that the survey does reflect the impact, positive impact that government payments are having on some of the monthly trends, whether those are the stimulus checks, SNAP, FreshEBT, you know, other payments. But I'm struck by one of the things that we see from the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month on the jobless situation, that even as there's some monthly improvement, when you compare it to where the country was in February 2020, pre-COVID, your survey is continuing to reveal pretty strong need. You know, it's great to see that the needle does move with those government payments, but it's still worrisome the degree to which people are experiencing a lot of the stresses that they're telling you about and that you are capturing here. Certainly, one of the things we know from the Department of Labor is that some people are struggling much harder, and it's much tougher for some people than others. We see that in disparities on racial categories, and we seem to see this in your survey. We also know, based on the Department of Labor's statistics, that there are more long-term jobless as a portion of overall jobless people in the country than really any time I can recall. It's over 40%, and it's been over 40% of all those who are unemployed have been unemployed 6 months or longer. So you know, it does seem that maybe that's related to some of the debt accumulation and the problems with housing and the problems with affording a range of things that one would expect when it's been such a tough year, but especially if you're out of work 6 months or longer, and that is a very big portion of the public. You know, this seems to be corroborating some of those trends and problems. In terms of the disparities, you know, you note in these slides that you see disparities in impacts on households headed by Latinx or Black adults, but also households with children. And that's not only with having enough to pay for utilities, but also what they're experiencing with churn. And this is maybe more a question for our attendees, many of whom do a lot of work with SNAP and with program access. You know, what are people seeing out there? And we won't have time to hear from them all during this short session, but I think at FRAC we would be very interested in hearing either insights from Propel about churn and what might be presenting the problems on the procedural glitch side with respect to access that's getting people disconnected to the program, when they're still financially eligible, but why we're also seeing that more among Latinx and Black adults, as well as households with children. So again, I think your survey points to things that probably we need deeper insights on. But I think it's such a contribution to help us in thinking through where do we need to put more attention. So again, we would welcome insights from the people who are attending and others who work with us on how to, where else we should go with this. And perhaps as you're looking at April and future months, different questions that Propel might ask. So you do ask some questions now about unemployment, but it might be that as the months go on. And I think I saw a question pop up, but Naomi, I'm having difficulty capturing it. I think it was a question about whether or not there's state level data. And so if you could say a few words about state level data and what you do and don't have, whether it's through this national set or not, that would be great, Julieta.
Sure. Yes, thank you for that. I think that we do have we ask every month questions about employment, and I think in last month's webinar we highlighted that we were seeing improvements in employment, but that those gains were unequally distributed across different racial groups. Black and Latinx respondents were more likely to say that they had lost or quit a job in the past month, and I think we're also currently, not working but looking to work. And I think that it's a great suggestion, and we'll consider adding a question in the next survey about how long people have been unemployed, to get a sense of that. I'm also thinking in terms of the question of churn, that we have some other research about the experience of using SNAP, and that it's focused more on that, and perhaps there are some answers to why overpayment and churn has a disproportionate impact on certain groups versus others. And I'd be happy to come back next month and share a bit more on that if we find any insights there. In terms of state level data, we do ask each person who completes a survey where they live. And so we do have information at the state level. In the next slide, if you can turn to it, is my email if people would like to contact us about that. There can be interesting insights there. It just, the sample size gets smaller, if you divide it per state. So it can be hard to kind of have even further insights about like families with children versus those without, and different racial groups, just as a caveat. But yes, we have state level data.
So Julieta, thank you to you and Stacy. I think we're at time. I'm going to turn it back to Naomi, but again, you've been very gracious in terms of sharing your insights and what your customers are telling you. And I do think it gives us some places to think more about how else we're going to research and what else we're going to do as a community. So again, thank you. And Naomi, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much for everyone joining us this afternoon on the East Coast, and thank you for bearing with us through the technical glitches. If you would like a recording, please email me nsmall@frac.org. That's nsmall@frac.org. Thank you all for joining us, and if you have questions about the survey, please email Julieta. Thank you so much and have a great day.